I have spent 30 years analyzing ballistic missile warfare, strategic strike operations, and the political military dynamics of coercive diplomacy. I commanded a Patriot battery during the Gulf War. I have reviewed intelligence assessments on every major missile exchange, from Scud attacks on Israel in 1991 to Houthi strikes on Saudi Arabia in 2019. Nothing in those 3 decades prepared me for what I studied in the battle damage assessment reports from May 18th regarding an Iranian ballistic missile barrage that struck 8 Israeli military installations in and around Tel Aviv over a 4-hour window on May 15th. 400 Zolfaghar medium-range ballistic missiles launched from sites across western Iran between 22:01 on May 14th and 02:01 on May 15th struck military targets, including the Kiryat Defense Headquarters Complex, the Palmakim Air Base, the Stat Misha Missile Defense Facility, 3 logistics depots, and 2 command bunkers that serve as alternate headquarters for the Israeli Defense Forces General Staff. 8 installations were destroyed or rendered inoperable. That represents the functional decapitation of Israel's ground-based command infrastructure in the greater Tel Aviv metropolitan area. Over 400 military personnel were killed or wounded. And within 72 hours of the strike, the Israeli government, under enormous domestic and international pressure, announced that it was entering ceasefire negotiations mediated by Egypt and Qatar. Negotiations that 3 weeks earlier Israeli leadership had publicly rejected. I want to be honest with you about something. When I first reviewed the video footage, the satellite imagery, and the strike pattern analysis from this operation, my initial reaction was not shock at the Iranian capability. The Zolfaghar is a proven system with a range of 700 kilometers and a circular error probable under 30 meters when using terminal guidance. My shock came from the strategic decision to launch 400 missiles at military targets inside Tel Aviv, knowing that such a strike would invite massive retaliation, and from the fact that the retaliation never came. Israel, for the first time in its history, absorbed a ballistic missile attack of this scale and chose negotiation over escalation. That is not a tactical decision. That is a strategic capitulation born of recognition that the cost of continued conflict had become unsustainable. In the next 42 minutes, I am going to answer 4 critical questions. First, how did Iran execute a 400 missile strike without being detected early enough for Israel to evacuate its command facilities? Second, why were Israeli missile defenses, including Arrow 3, David's Sling, and Iron Dome, unable to intercept more than a fraction of the incoming barrage? Third, what was the internal Israeli political and military calculation that led to the decision to pursue ceasefire negotiations rather than escalatory retaliation? And fourth, what does this operation tell us about the future of missile warfare, strategic coercion, and the changing balance of power in a region where precision-guided ballistic missiles are now available at scale to multiple state and non-state actors? If this is the kind of direct, unsparing analysis you have been searching for, subscribe to this channel immediately. Hit the like button. Drop your thoughts in the comments because I want to know what you think this means for regional stability and the credibility of deterrence. This is not the sanitized version you will get from official briefings or mainstream outlets. Let's begin. Phase 1. The pre-strike intelligence preparation and launch sequence, May 13th to May 15th. The Iranian operation that struck Tel Aviv on May 15th was not improvised. It was the culmination of weeks of intelligence collection, targeting, refinement, and operational rehearsal. Iranian intelligence assets, including signals intelligence platforms, and almost certainly human sources operating inside Israel or among third-country contractors with access to Israeli defense infrastructure, compiled detailed targeting packages on 8 high-value military installations in the Tel Aviv region. The Kiryat, Israel's defense headquarters located in central Tel Aviv, is a known, fixed location, but the facility is hardened with underground command bunkers designed to survive conventional strikes. Iranian planners allocated 60 missiles to the Kiryat alone, knowing that a single warhead would be insufficient to achieve the desired effect. The goal was not just to damage the facility. The goal was to render it inoperable by cratering access roads, destroying above-ground communications infrastructure, and collapsing sections of the bunker complex through repeated kinetic strikes. Palmachim Air Base, located 15 kilometers south of Tel Aviv, is the launch site for Israeli ballistic missile tests and serves as a secondary headquarters for the Israeli Space Agency and classified aerospace programs. Iranian targeting assigned 85 missiles to Palmachim with the specific objective of destroying runway infrastructure, hardened aircraft shelters, and the underground control facility that coordinates satellite launches. The Sdot Misha Missile Defense Facility, which houses Arrow 3 interceptors and fire control radars, was allocated 70 missiles. The logic was clear. Destroy the defenses first, and the follow-on waves face reduced opposition. The strike sequence began at 22 Ka local time on May 14th, when the first wave of 100 missiles lifted off from Revolutionary Guard Corps launch sites in Kermanshah and Hamadan provinces in western Iran. The missiles followed a high ballistic trajectory, peaking at approximately 180 kilometers altitude before descending onto their targets. Total flight time was between 9 and 12 minutes, depending on the specific launch point and target pairing. Israeli early warning systems detected the launches within 90 seconds. Arrow 3 interceptor batteries were queued. But here is the problem that Israeli air defense planners have known about for years, but have not solved. Arrow 3 is optimized for exo-atmospheric intercepts of missiles in the mid-course phase of flight. The system has a magazine depth of approximately 48 interceptors per battery, and Israel operates 6 Arrow 3 batteries. That is 288 interceptors total. Against a salvo of 100 missiles, even with a generous 70% kill probability, you are expending 70 interceptors to achieve 70 kills. That leaves 30 missiles inbound, and you have only 218 interceptors remaining for the follow-on waves. The second wave launched at 23:30, 150 missiles this time, targeting the logistics depots and command bunkers that had been assigned lower priority in the first wave. Israeli Arrow 3 batteries were already reloading. David's sling systems, which are designed for medium-range threats, engaged missiles that Arrow 3 had missed or that were assessed as lower priority. The intercept rate dropped to approximately 55% due to saturation. 82 missiles reached their targets. The third wave launched at 01 Zern on May 15th, another 150 missiles, again targeting Palmachim and the Kiryat. By this point, Israeli interceptor stocks were critically depleted. Arrow 3 batteries had expended over 80% of their ready inventory. David's sling was down to 40%. Iron Dome, which is designed for short-range rockets and artillery, was tasked as a last-ditch defense, but proved ineffective against ballistic missiles with terminal velocities exceeding Mach 5. The intercept rate in the third wave fell to 38%. 93 missiles impacted. By 02 Kausar, when the final salvo concluded, 400 missiles had been launched. Israeli air defense had intercepted approximately 210, that is a 5% intercept rate, which sounds respectable until you realize that 190 ballistic missiles impacting across 8 military targets in a 4-hour window is a strategic catastrophe. The Kiryat was hit by 34 missiles. The facility is not destroyed, but it is inoperable. Palmachim took 51 hits. 3 runways are cratered, 2 hangars collapsed, and the underground control center lost power and ventilation when a missile penetrated through a ventilation shaft. Sdot Misha took 42 hits. The facility's radars are offline, and at least one Arrow 3 launcher was destroyed in place. Let me be precise about this. Israel expended approximately $3 billion worth of interceptor missiles defending against an attack that cost Iran an estimated $180 million to execute. The cost exchange ratio was 7-1 in favor of the attacker, and that does not account for the cost of repairing the damage, which will run into the billions, or the strategic cost of having your command infrastructure rendered inoperable for weeks or months. Phase 2, the damage assessment and operational paralysis, May 15th to May 17th. Within 6 hours of the final missile impact, Israeli Defense Forces leadership convened an emergency assessment session in an alternate command facility north of Tel Aviv. The carrier was offline. Communications with ground units were degraded. Satellite uplinks from Palmakim were severed. And most critically, the air defense network had expended over 70% of its interceptor inventory defending against a single night of missile strikes. The operational reality was stark. If Iran launched a second wave of 400 missiles the following night, Israeli air defenses would be unable to provide effective protection. The interceptor magazines were depleted, and resupply from the United States, even on an emergency basis, would require a minimum of 72 hours for the first shipments to arrive and another week to integrate the missiles into battery-level fire control systems. Strategically, Israel faced a choice: retaliate with a massive air campaign against Iranian missile sites and command facilities, which would require penetrating the S-400 air defense network that Russia had just transferred to Iran, or accept the strike, absorb the damage, and pursue a negotiated de-escalation. The first option carried the risk of catastrophic aircraft losses and the potential for further Iranian escalation, possibly including attacks on critical infrastructure like water desalination plants or power generation facilities. The second option carried the political cost of appearing weak, but it preserved combat power and avoided a potential death spiral into full-scale war. On May 16th, Israeli Prime Minister publicly acknowledged the strikes, described them as a grave act of aggression, and announced that Israel was prepared to explore all diplomatic avenues to prevent further escalation. That was a carefully worded statement that signaled to regional mediators that Israel was open to ceasefire talks. By May 17th, Egyptian intelligence officials were shuttling between Tel Aviv and Tehran, carrying proposals for a temporary halt to hostilities. Let me tell you something. I have watched Israeli crisis decision-making for 3 decades. The Israeli doctrine, formalized after the traumatic experience of the Yom Kippur War in 1973, is that any attack on Israeli territory must be met with overwhelming retaliation to maintain deterrence. That doctrine held through rocket attacks from Gaza, missile strikes from Hezbollah, and even occasional Syrian artillery fire. But it broke on May 15th. It broke because the scale of the Iranian missile barrage, combined with the degraded state of Israeli air defenses and the strategic protection Iran now enjoys from Russian S-400 systems, made retaliation prohibitively costly. That is not weakness. That is a rational calculation in the face of a changed strategic environment. But it is also a signal to every actor in the region that the rules have changed. If Israel will negotiate after absorbing 400 ballistic missile strikes, what does that tell Hezbollah? What does it tell Hamas? What does it tell Syria? It tells them that Israeli deterrence, which for 50 years rested on the credible threat of disproportionate retaliation, is eroding. Phase 3. The Washington response and alliance strain, May 15th to May 20th. The Pentagon's response to the May 15th strikes was delayed and muted. No emergency statement was issued in the immediate aftermath. No carrier strike group was repositioned. No announcement of interceptor resupply was made for 48 hours. The silence was interpreted by Israeli leadership correctly as a signal that Washington was not prepared to be drawn into a direct confrontation with Iran over missile strikes that, while devastating, had targeted military installations rather than civilian population centers. When Secretary of Defense did issue a statement on May 17th, the language was carefully calibrated. The statement condemned Iranian aggression, reaffirmed U.S. commitment to Israeli security and announced an expedited delivery of 200 Arrow 3 and David's Sling interceptors. But there was no threat of retaliation. There was no ultimatum to Tehran. There was no deployment of additional U.S. forces to the region. The message, read between the lines, was that the United States would help Israel defend itself, but would not support offensive operations that risked wider war. That position created immediate friction. Israeli defense officials, speaking on background to journalists, expressed frustration that Washington was counseling restraint after Israel had just absorbed the most significant ballistic missile attack in its history. American officials, equally frustrated, pointed out that Israel had conducted operations in Lebanon and Syria over the past decade that had contributed to the escalatory cycle, and that the United States had no obligation to support retaliatory strikes that could trigger a regional war involving U.S. forces. The tension was real and it was noticed. In capitals from Riyadh to Ankara, the perception was that the U.S.-Israel alliance, while not broken, was under strain in ways that created opportunities for alternative security arrangements. If Washington will not back Israel in a crisis of this magnitude, what value does the U.S. security guarantee hold for other regional partners? Phase 4, Strategic Implications and the Normalization of Missile Warfare. What happened on May 15th is not just about Iran and Israel. It is about the normalization of precision ballistic missile strikes as a tool of coercion in regional conflict. For decades, ballistic missiles were seen as weapons of last resort, tools for delivering nuclear warheads or carrying out indiscriminate terror attacks on cities. That perception is obsolete. Modern precision-guided ballistic missiles like the Zolfaghar can strike military targets with accuracy comparable to cruise missiles or air-delivered munitions, and they can do so at a fraction of the cost, with none of the risk to pilots, and without requiring control of the airspace. That makes them the weapon of choice for states that lack air superiority but possess domestic missile production capacity or access to external suppliers like Russia, China, or North Korea. Iran has demonstrated that it can launch 400 missiles in a single night, achieve militarily significant effects, and force an adversary to the negotiating table without triggering uncontrollable escalation. That demonstration is being studied carefully in Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang, and every capital where leaders are making decisions about how to invest limited defense budgets. The lesson is clear. Invest in missiles, not aircraft. Missiles are cheaper, harder to intercept, and strategically effective. In Moscow, Russian defense analysts view the May 15th operation as validation of their own missile-centric military doctrine. Russia has invested heavily in ballistic and cruise missile systems precisely because they provide strategic reach without the vulnerabilities associated with manned aircraft. The Iranian strike demonstrates that even a regional power, if equipped with sufficient missile inventory, can achieve effects that would have required a major air campaign in previous decades. In Beijing, Chinese military planners are drawing lessons for potential operations against Taiwan, Japan, and U.S. bases in the Pacific. The People's Liberation Army Rocket Force operates thousands of ballistic missiles. If 400 missiles can decapitate Israeli command infrastructure, what can 4,000 missiles do to U.S. and allied bases across the first island chain? The answer is that they can achieve strategic paralysis before the United States can even mobilize a response. For the Gulf states, the implications are deeply unsettling. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have faced Iranian-backed missile and drone attacks for years. But those attacks have been limited in scale and largely intercepted. The May 15th operation demonstrates that Iran, if it chooses, can overwhelm Gulf air defenses in the same way it overwhelmed Israeli defenses. And if Israeli defenses, which are among the most capable in the world, can be saturated, what chance do Saudi Patriot batteries have? For the broader international community, the lesson is that missile proliferation is not a future threat. It is a present reality, and the existing arms control regimes, including the Missile Technology Control Regime, have failed to prevent the spread of precision-guided ballistic missile technology. Iran produces Zolfaghar missiles domestically. North Korea exports Hwasong variants to multiple clients. China sells DF-series missiles to Pakistan and other partners. The technology is diffusing, and the barriers to entry are dropping. I warned about this in testimony before the House Armed Services Committee in 2015. I said that the United States was underinvesting in missile defense and overestimating the effectiveness of existing systems like Patriot and THAAD against saturation attacks. I was told that the threat was manageable, that American technology would maintain the edge, and that diplomatic efforts would constrain proliferation. Those assurances have been disproven. The threat is not manageable. American technology is being outpaced by the volume and sophistication of adversary systems, and diplomatic efforts have failed. The human cost of this failure is measured in the 400 Israeli military personnel who were killed or wounded on May 15th. These are soldiers, airmen, intelligence analysts, and support staff who were doing their jobs in facilities that were supposed to be defended by the most advanced air defense network in the world. They trusted that the billions spent on Arrow, David's Sling, and Iron Dome would protect them. That trust was misplaced, not because the systems are ineffective, but because the mathematics of missile defense in an era of mass-produced precision weapons favor the attacker. There are families in Israel right now who are grieving losses that could have been prevented if Israeli leadership had acknowledged years ago that the missile threat from Iran was growing faster than the defensive systems designed to counter it. There are commanders who authorized personnel to remain in facilities that became targets, believing those facilities were safe. And there are decision makers in Washington who counseled restraint when investment in next-generation missile defense might have changed the outcome. These are not abstractions. These are real people who paid the price for strategic miscalculation at the highest levels of government. The question I want to leave you with is this. If 400 precision-guided ballistic missiles can force Israel, one of the most militarily capable states on the planet, to the negotiating table after a single night of strikes, what does that mean for the future of deterrence, the credibility of alliances, and the balance of power in a world where missile technology is proliferating to dozens of state and non-state actors? Are we entering an era where missile-armed regional powers can operate with impunity, confident that the cost of retaliation exceeds the benefit? And if so, what does that mean for the international order that has held, however imperfectly, since 1945? Drop your assessment in the comments. I want to know what you think. Is this the beginning of a new era of missile-centric warfare, or an anomaly that will be corrected by improved defenses? If this analysis gave you perspective you are not finding in mainstream coverage, share this video, hit like, and subscribe. The next breakdown is already in preparation, and I will see you there.